Okay. Who's up first? Who's on first?
Which one is it? Yeah, who's on second?
No, what's on second?
What's on third? What's on third? Who's on second?
And Al's on third? No. All set up. Past our best by date. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Mayor.
Good morning, Mayor.
Thank you. Nice to see so many fresh faces out at an early council meeting. It's unusual. Wonder what brings people out. So I'll call the regular meeting of council for Tuesday, September 3rd to order. Look into the agenda. Are there errors or additions to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking then to the minutes of August 20th, 2019. Are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to item H1, Climate Action Plan Priority Items for 2020. Ms. Fournier.
Good morning, Mayor Borman, members of council. I am Amy Fournier, and I had been introduced to you guys earlier this year by Andreas, and now I am here today to give you an update on work I've been doing to identify the items from the Climate Action Plan, which we should start focusing on in the short term. And some of these will require some budget, so I wanted to highlight those for you today. Feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation, as I am covering a lot, so I would welcome those at any time, and we'll leave some space at the end as well. Just a reminder of what we have committed to. Our targets are a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, a 50% reduction in emissions from our town operations by 2030, and a long-term target of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. The actions that I'm discussing with you guys today are not new. When we adopted the targets, it was part of the Climate Action Plan that was approved last December. In addition to the targets, the Climate Action Plan also set our 2015 greenhouse gas inventory baseline. The pie chart here shows the relative proportions of our different emission sources. The plan also provided 60 suggested actions which we could take to help achieve the targets. They really vary from small initiatives to kind of larger systemic changes that could be potentially quite expensive. Part of the role that I have in what I was hired to do was to work on prioritizing those suggested actions in the plan and develop kind of a timeline for implementing those. The plan didn't go so far as to identify which actions might most effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared to the amount of effort involved. So that's the work that I have been doing and will continue to do. So the goal for this kind of prioritizing of the actions in the plan has been to determine which ones will most effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions and consider what different co-benefits are and how that aligns to work that we're already doing. And ultimately, the goal that we have is to have enough information to make good, thoughtful decisions on how to move forward, but not have me spend my 2 years here doing a kind of a deep level of analysis on the plan, because ultimately, to reach our targets, we do need to start moving forward on the actions. The process that I've undergone to develop the recommendations that are in the staff report are from starting in May, really working with different staff to develop evaluation criteria of how we're going to consider the different actions, understand what has already been done. The good news is many of the suggested actions in the plan, there are many that are already underway to some degree. Also to compare kind of what we're doing and what we're proposing to best practices that are noted from elsewhere and what other municipalities are doing in their climate work. Lastly, part of the exercise, this is a kind of a cross-departmental effort and a town-wide strategy. So working with staff from different departments to identify what we can expect in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, but really trying to understand more the degree of difficulty that might be involved in certain actions or the costs or all of the implications of doing the work. Work that still needs to be done. Some of the actions need some more scoping and some more work to develop the budget. Getting work on 2020 work plans, as well as what I'm discussing with you guys today is only for what we should be starting in 2020. The longer term timeline between 2021 and 2030 still needs to be developed, and a lot of the things that we're starting in 2020 will be a first step towards kind of longer term efforts. This is just an example of an exercise that I had done with staff and helping us map. So we took the actions that were pertinent to that department and sat down and mapped them out in terms of what we could expect for impact, which is basically greenhouse gas emissions reduced versus the cost involved or the degree of difficulty in implementation. So ideally, we want to be focusing on the upper left-hand quadrant, so kind of like your bigger bang for your buck actions. And we don't want to be really focusing on actions that kind of fall into the lower right-hand quadrant. After this, the actions that boiled to the top, I compared them to kind of best practices from different municipalities and work that's been identified by other organizations that are known to be successful in this area. For the actions that we should be undertaking for 2020, when it comes to greenhouse gas reduction, this is generally how we should be prioritizing and putting in our resources and effort in this order. This aligns with the sources of our greenhouse gas emissions, with buildings being our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions and waste being the smallest. So we should kind of keep this in mind as we're moving forward to kind of put the resources in this kind of order of priority. So this not only aligns with our sources of greenhouse gas emissions, but the work of organizations that are doing a deep level of research and analysis to support different levels of government on their climate plans have identified what are called high impact practices. And this generally follows kind of what their recommendations are. As well, the actions that I am recommending for 2020 also are aligned to what these high impact practices are that have been identified by a number of different organizations working on climate change. The recommendations also will kind of focus on supportive elements of work that the town is already doing, and have been considered, time-sensitive opportunities have also been considered. So those might be projects that the town is undertaking currently, or some funding that we may be able to access. So all of this information is kind of fed into what I'm recommending. So jumping right into it, the first one is to undertake a renewable energy feasibility study and these will potentially inform some targets down the road. So the Climate Action Plan, in addition to the greenhouse gas targets, recommended setting a renewable energy target. Many municipalities are setting renewable energy targets. But before we do that, we really need to understand what makes sense in Canmore and do our homework for what's involved and what the implications might be of setting a renewable energy target. This is potentially our largest area of potential impact that we could have, but it's also very expensive. So doing the background work and to really understand the feasibility and what's involved and what the best way to go and best sources of energy to focus on needs to be done first. We don't have the technical capability in-house, and so for this one, consulting support would be required. The good news, though, is that we have done some work in this area already, which we can build upon for a study. There are also a number of organizations that I've listed up here that are geared towards supporting municipalities in their renewable energy efforts, and we can lean to them to help kind of build up the work before we're bringing in consultants. We are actually in the midst of a project with Wast, and they are doing some technical mapping for us as part of a project with 5 other municipalities looking at our renewable energy opportunities. So some of the work can be done ahead of time. And then the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, has a funding stream for studies in which they can pay 50% of the study cost. So hopefully we can also be able to access this to help with the budget. For new buildings and new construction, this is a key area for us, particularly for our longer term targets. We are trying to achieve greenhouse gas reductions while population is growing, and we are about adding building stock. So it's important that we are building highly efficient new buildings. Once built, it is a lot more challenging and more expensive to go back and improve the efficiency of buildings. For example, one of the most effective things you can do to lower the energy demand of a building is just have really good insulation, which is a lot easier to do when you're building it as opposed to trying to go back after the fact. So here are our new building recommendations. I wanted to make the point that, well, I'm going to kind of list a number of priorities for 2020, and it may seem overwhelming in that there are probably too many. These ones, the work, we're not committing to being done and ticking these all off by the end of 2020. A lot of this is just to start, to do the research, to do the groundwork. This is just the start of potentially kind of a multi-year effort, and so not all of these will be complete or committed to. You can see that a few of them are about exploration and research and initiating things. So the first is to look at how we may require new buildings to be solar ready or electric vehicle ready. And by solar ready, it's not saying all new buildings have to have solar panels. What it basically is enabling them so that in the future, 6 or 7 years down the road, if somebody wanted to install solar panels, there may be an electric conduit already there. So it avoids having potentially expensive retrofits to have to do because some of the basics are already there or the roof is oriented in the right way. The second one is to start doing some research on what low emission or zero emission new buildings look like, what is involved, and start discussions with the development industry on what the implications of these are to really understand them better. The third is to look at how when an individual or group wants to build a green new building or a highly sustainable new building, how do we as a town support and encourage that? The fourth is to look at when we're doing affordable housing and new affordable housing, how to ensure that those are being built in places where people aren't going to be required to own a car to go get groceries and attend to their day-to-day needs. And the last one is a small advocacy piece. Can we encourage the provincial government to adopt a greener building code? With existing buildings, they are the largest source of our greenhouse gas emissions. They are also the most challenging to kind of achieve reductions in because there are not very many levers to require energy efficiency improvements after they've been built. This is also why renewable energy is an important area of opportunity for this, because if we can have renewable fuels, trying to get buildings to be more efficient is kind of less important. The recommended starting in 2020 actions then are looking at options. Can we require some energy efficiency improvements when a major renovation is being undertaken? We don't know what the options are for that, so we can kind of try to get under that a little bit. Continue to explore property assessed clean energy programs. So currently, Canmore is part of a municipal working group that is looking at PACE programs, and there's a pilot happening in Edmonton right now that can help inform future decisions around this. The Biosphere Institute is also doing a fairly large energy efficiency project right now involving a lot of stakeholder and community consultation, and this will end next year in 2020. And the work that they were doing is great because it will really inform what our potential role could be, and from there we may be able to consider further what the town can do to support retrofits. The Energy Efficiency Alberta does have programs aimed at supporting homeowners and business owners to make upgrades to their buildings. Once we are clearer about what the future of Energy Efficiency Alberta and their programs are, then we can potentially be able to just point residents and business owners to those programs as opposed to reinventing something ourselves. With transportation emissions, the target in the Integrated Transportation Plan of 40% of trips in the summertime being taken by bus, foot, or bicycle directly supports greenhouse gas reduction. So there's a lot of synergy there. And the work that is being done by the folks in transportation and transportation-related programs will help achieve greenhouse gas emission reduction. So all the work that's being done on complete streets and the bicycle network, as well as any transit improvements, transit infrastructure, and the free local transit will also support the Climate Action Plan. The actions then from the Climate Plan will focus on the remaining trips that will still be taken by vehicles. So the Climate Plan of areas will be looking at kind of a further investigation of car sharing and supporting electric vehicles. So whether that be just market-driven charging or having a better understanding of what the town's role is in facilitating EVs and really understanding where the charging needs are, as kind of facilitating at home and at work charging or public charging and what that balance is. Lastly, considering offering a studded bike tire rebate as they do in Banff. For our waste actions, in about less than an hour, we can officially say that we have launched the residential pilot. And then for 2020, a big focus is developing a commercial and institutional program. And then in a year's time, once we have some results from the pilot, we can evaluate options for potential expansion for a town-wide residential program. The second piece is how to integrate food waste reduction. So now we have an ability to divert food waste from the landfill, but how is there a role to play for actually reducing the amount of food that is going in the garbage? There are some pretty staggering statistics about how much food in Canada, about half of the food in Canada that is actually produced goes in the garbage. So how do we reduce that? And how is that integrated into our food waste diversion programs that we're developing? After food waste is in hand, and we've implemented that, the next piece to start on would be construction, renovation, and demolition waste. That is the next bigger piece of the kind of waste pie. With our facilities, our Town of Canmore buildings are the biggest contributor to our Town of Canmore operational emissions. Some good news is that a lot of the actions that were recommended in the climate plan are already being undertaken to some degree. In the attachment 2 of the staff report, it lists all of the current status of the different actions recommended in the climate plan. So all the work that's being done to support solar on the buildings, especially the high-consuming buildings, as well as even small kind of operational changes like the last bullet, where it talks about how they are testing a new process to treat ice using cold water instead of hot water, which gives us some energy savings from not having to heat the water. Therefore, the actions being recommended to start on for facilities are to develop a flexible green building policy or some guidelines to guide our kind of future development of our own buildings, as well as we're considering a new fire hall, making sure that we are also evaluating options to make that a sustainable building. For our fleet, there is some funding available through the Municipal Climate Change Action Center to fund half of a study, which would take a portion of our fleet and look at that in detail and determine the suitability for electric vehicles, as well as all the different cost implications and kind of life cycle costs and maintenance implications of a portion of our fleet. And so we'd want to do this ahead of and this would likely focus on our passenger fleet because that's where the bigger opportunities for electric vehicles are right now, but doing that ahead of when our vehicles might be up for replacement so that that can inform our decisions on whether we'd want to consider purchasing an electric vehicle for our fleet. The second piece is to develop some guidelines to help inform purchasing decisions and making sure that we're also considering fuel efficiency of vehicles when making those purchases. So circling back to the recommendation, what we're asking for today is to accept the report and presentation for planning purposes and ask staff to come back with a proposed budget for the items requiring funding for council consideration. And as a reminder, the items that are requiring budget are the big pieces, the renewable energy feasibility study. So more work has to be done to develop that budget and bring that back. And then much smaller amounts for the assessment for our fleet vehicles, looking at electric vehicles and for a potential studded bike tire rebate. So that's it.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be a few questions. That was a really comprehensive review of the report, and I appreciate, or thank you for that. In fact, you've answered a few of the questions I had from previewing the agenda report. One curiosity in the report, not in the attachments, but in the report itself, you note under point 4, you're talking about transportation, the ways of moving towards reduce GHG emissions through our transportation. And you exploring car sharing and supporting electric vehicle charging stations. You don't specifically reference the work that we're doing within the moving towards mode shift in transportation. So a big part of the reason we're doing that is to reduce the GHG. So wouldn't that find a place in this specific component of your report?
Yep, that is important work, and that, excuse me. So for that work, we are doing that work already, and it's challenging, it's a lot to get done, and it's going to be difficult to achieve those mode shifts, but that work is kind of being done through the work of the Integrated Transportation Plan and whatnot. So the focus then for the climate plan is to work on those actions that were identified as beneficial in the Integrated Transportation Plan, but not resourced. So we can take up the area pertaining to vehicle trips and benefit from the mode shift work that's being done already.
Great. So then I understand that the work we're doing is, or the work that's being recommended is in addition to the work we're already doing.
Yeah.
Directed towards
Yes.
reducing GHG.
Yeah, definitely not saying we should be doing this or focusing on that instead of that.
Right.
What it's saying is that this is being targeted and done through the Integrated Transportation Plan work and other transportation initiatives at the town. And then we can focus on this other area that is not already being done.
Great. And I have, I'm a little curious about the PACE program, which you've referenced here and also in Appendix 2. So help me with this. I understand the PACE program depends to some extent on senior level of government support.
You know what, I am not involved in the PACE discussions. That would be Lori Risling-Wynn. So if there's questions that are specific to the mechanics of PACE, I will invite her up to answer those. Thank you.
Thanks.
Of course. Pace.
Right, so as I understand it, the PACE program actually depends on leadership and certainly support from provincial, or I suppose federal, but it's not really something that the town can do independently of the provincial government, is that right
So
or wrong?
the PACE legislation is already written and passed so it's in place for municipalities to take advantage of it, and City of Edmonton is doing that. They are doing a pilot PACE program right now. The piece that municipalities would also have to take on is developing and passing a PACE enabling bylaw. So we have yet to bring that forward to council to contemplate having a PACE bylaw, which would allow borrowing against a fund, which would allow the retrofits for those people that determine they want to participate.
Right. So the mechanics is that, you said borrowing against a fund. So which fund, where's the fund rest? Whose fund is it?
So when I first brought this item to council at that time, there was thought that it would be privately funded through investors. The province has since that time kind of changed gears on that and has decided that private investment isn't the way they want to fund these programs going forward.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So there won't be a private investment fund available to support the potential retrofits that would come through a PACE program, but municipalities would have access to borrowing, which would enable the fund to fund the retrofit. So we would have to look at opportunities that are available to us in terms of additional borrowing, and how, from what I understand, it wouldn't affect our debt limit, but all of those details need to be
So
worked out.
presumably the borrowing would be from the Alberta Capital Financing?
Something like that, and I'm not totally clear on the details, which is kind of why it's nice to see what City of Edmonton is going to
Okay.
end up doing. Yeah.
Thanks, that helps. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your first presentation. That's wonderful that you've had that opportunity now. The first bullet on the items requiring budget, that's the one that's eligible for FCM 50% funding?
Yes, potentially.
Okay, so you'd have to apply for that, but that's what you see?
Yes.
Okay.
That funding stream is open anytime. There's no deadline to
Oh,
apply for that, and so you can apply as you need.
Yeah, I think we've benefited from some FCM funding in the past, and
Yeah, probably.
yeah. The other question I had for you is in the chart that you provided, one of the things to be included in that, the feasibility study, would be to consider waste-to-energy projects within the community. And do you have an idea what that might look like?
No. What this action aims to do, and I appreciate you bringing this up, is that there are, I think, 9 different actions recommended in the climate plan that pertain to kind of specific types of renewable energy or sources like waste to energy. And so this recommendation to do a general feasibility study is to kind of look at the different ones and evaluate what ones might have more promise, because it isn't clear about what that would look like, or what that would be quite of a challenging one, and we don't have any knowledge of whether that would work or not, or what that would look like. So there's no kind of preferred we haven't gone down the path yet to figure out what that would be, and if that's even remotely possible.
So does that align with our consideration of the SAWA project, which is a Southern Alberta energy to waste that is being currently considered?
Proposed or looked at as a broader thing. Yeah, and it would be, those actions were recommended by a consultant, a year ago. So some of them aren't aligned in their wording to what we'd want to do, but part of that would be looking at that project, or what are the opportunities, not just within Canmore, because our town is small and we have very limited land capacity, and so what are the options kind of for partnership outside of our jurisdiction as well, and does it make more sense to do kind of external partnerships outside of our town? And that would be something.
We'd consider it, because
Yeah.
we're already.
And we can triage them as well. There might be some that we might be able to knock off right away or early in the stages before we do a deeper dive on. And that's where kind of some more scoping needs to be done to develop some scope options for the study, because it might be cost prohibitive to look at all things in how they are right now.
Can you just tell me what considered district energy would be?
Yeah, so district energy, there's systems where an energy source, and it could be anything, it doesn't need to be renewable energy, ideally it would be, but it's done on a district-wide system, and so it's best in the cases of, say, new developments, especially when there's like a large industrial load. So I worked for the city of Vancouver for a number of years, and we had a district energy system underneath the Southeast False Creek development. And so it actually used waste heat from the sewer system for hydronic heating of all the buildings. And so they did not have individual heating units on the apartment buildings. They were all heated through this underground district energy system. So that's an example of what that could look like. And that's been a suggestion. Whether that we have the density to achieve a cost-effective district energy system is unknown.
Okay, thank you.
A question in regards to attachment 2, the long list of actions. Number 3, the buildings section. The first suggestion is research options for requirements for energy efficiency and renovations. And I'm just curious if you think that might have any relevance or connection to the current revision work we're doing for the land use bylaw. Is that something that should inform the revised land use bylaw?
It might. So first we have to see, what are we legally able to do? What do we have the jurisdiction over? And this is why a lot of these recommendations pertaining to buildings are coming forward now, is because we are doing a lot of work on new development, and so we need to do the research and kind of background analysis because we want to take advantage of the timing that we have right now. And if we don't want to miss the boat. So if we want to do some of these things, we have to do them quickly while we're doing all of the
So
the
knowing
pre-work.
the timeline or the ever-shifting timeline on getting through to third reading of this current land use bylaw revision.
And that one, pertains less to kind of our new development that's happening in land use bylaws, but it's more geared towards, an existing home that's built, say, in the 60s, that's coming forward for a massive renovation.
Right.
So that one is a little more flexible that way, but it is trying to take advantage of work that's being planned for.
Great, so we'll expect to see some suggestions from the work you're doing at the next presentation of the land use bylaw. Mr. Fark, you look like you have something to say.
Sorry, I might interject here. So it is certainly something that we are considering and looking into, not just for the LUB, but for other higher level statutory plans, solar orientation of new development, for example, as a potential policy. But we have to be very careful, especially in land use, and we've discussed this with council recently. Land use and the LUB is about buildings and use of land. And so there's the building code, which regulates building requirements, and we would have to be careful about straying into an area where we do not have the regulatory authority. So it was something that will inform our conversations, but we have to be cognizant of our limitations.
Thank you. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. This might be a difficult one to answer, but I like where we're going with the electric vehicle replacement, and just wondering about policy when it comes into it. That technology is kind of leading edge, and I'm hoping that we can take a look and extend the life cycle replacement, because up front those costs are going to be maybe a little bit more. Do you have any information that would support an electric vehicle needing to be replaced like a longer time period? Because I understand they require less maintenance and everything else, and there might be some efficiencies we can use there.
Yeah, correct. They do require less maintenance, and that does get built into the kind of overall analysis. But that's why we want to have take advantage of the Municipal Climate Change Action Center's funding that they're providing to do this, because we don't have the hard numbers that would say, it's X dollars for the upfront cost, but life cycle, we don't have that level of detail. In general, we know that there are lower costs over the entire life cycle, but we don't know what those are and how that compares to an internal combustion engine, as well as, incorporating the charging requirements. So that is why we're trying to do the study, is to really get under that.
Great, thank you. And the Bow Valley Clean Air Society, they've made some comments about past examples of aggressive targets and recommended strong implementation. That's all what we're working through. But the biggest bang for our dollar, I think, is what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I mean, really, a lot of that letter from the Bow Valley Clean Air Society kind of stemmed a lot of this work in the analysis, and that's kind of where the starting point that I had was, okay, let's see if we can do a cost per ton analysis of these actions and figure out what the biggest bang for the buck is, and a lot of that is really guiding what we want to start doing in 2020. But in order to kind of understand the biggest bang for the buck, especially for the higher kind of potential items, we do need to do some more research and feasibility work.
Great, thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Mayor Borman. Thank you for your presentation. So I just want to be clear, in your presentation, you're just looking sort of for a general nod that these are going to be inserted in the budget for council review. All of the other things that are on this action list don't require dollars attached to
Correct,
investigate
yeah.
them? Okay, just wanted to be sure. That's what I thought I read, but and when you begin to look, I really love the idea of the car sharing. I think it's something that this community is ripe for, and I think the entire valley is ripe for it, actually. Is that the lens in which you're going to be looking? Are you going to be looking at it at Canmore first and then seeing if there's partners up the valley that might be interested? Should implementation be benefited through economies of scale?
Mm-hmm. No, that is a good point. It could include both in conversations with our kind of Bow Valley partners.
I know that the town of Banff is looking into it, and I also know it's part of the 5-year strategy for Rome. So just to say, everybody's sort of side-eyeing it, so it would be great to get some...
Not just focus on Canmore.
Yeah, I think that that's where the success will really lay, is on something regional. And to be fair, like myself, for instance, we've been a one-car family for a while, so we've been using rental cars to shore ourselves up. I see what they do in the Kootenays with small communities. They have a car share co-op. It would be an interesting model to investigate, because that's morphed and changed over time.
Yeah, definitely. I know from my time in Vancouver, car sharing was really quite game-changing, and what it really enabled people to do is become a one-car family and get rid of that second car, because when you needed it, you could still have one available, but for the most part, you didn't need it. And also, it supports the transit system, because it enables people to commute via transit and then have that extra car for the weekend trips.
Plug a hole. The only thing I would say the difference between Vancouver and us is population.
Yes, just a bit. They have a small...
Well, no, I think that there's a lot of things in Vancouver that are quite transferable to our community, and I've been looking at this for probably 5 or 6 years, a car-to-go system versus a car cooperative, which are two very different models.
Exactly.
And so I think a car cooperative would work much better in a rural setting, whereas a car-to-go type of, or, well, what's the other, there's car-to-go, there's a couple of them. That requires quite an intensive economy of scale that we just don't have here.
And that's the big question is, do we have the density? Do we have the economies of scale? Are we big enough?
But the co-op model does work in Vancouver. It just works very differently than the car share. Yeah. Anyways, thank you very much.
Thanks.
That's interesting, because I always thought the car sharing required like a private partner to enact. But the fact that, good to hear. I recall, I had a conversation not quite 2 years ago with a fellow that lived in town who had some background in business, and he was looking and talking with people about initiating a car sharing program both in Canmore and Banff, and had worked with our engineering department, who were supportive of providing location on Main Street, for instance. Do you know if there's any movement on that private?
Yeah, I do know that there has been some initial conversations a while ago, and this would just be understanding those where that went to, and kind of just furthering the conversation with partners who might be interested, how it's worked elsewhere. So, I mean, it's a big kind of research and kind of consultation project. Oh, nice. Yeah. Good to know.
Don't have a mic on there. You don't have a mic on. One last question I have from the attachment 2, and this has been, or you've talked about this before, the suggestion under the transportation area, consider offering a studded bike tire rebate similar to the solar incentive. And I know Banff initiated that last year. Do we have any sort of data that shows the real impact or the real benefit of that? I appreciate it's not a big budget item, but is there in truth any sort of a return on that investment? Or
That shows, what we do know from Banff is that it was immediately oversubscribed and filled up. But yeah, making that link, behavior change is a hard one to measure and impact, because you don't know if your initiative is the thing that attributes to the actual change or the combination of things. So what I don't know, and part of this would be to contact Banff and see if they have any numbers of like estimates of wintertime cycling before the initiative versus afterwards.
You know, my sense of cyclists here in Canmore, at least, if they're avid cyclists, which we have a lot of, they want to ride their bikes in the winter and they're going to get studded tires regardless. So it seems to me that an incentive program from the municipality it may spur some people to go ahead and do that without doing it on their own, but I'm not certain that that's how it would play out. On the other hand, it's a fairly small budget item, so not going to get all wound up about it.
Yeah.
Are there other questions, Councillor McCallum?
No, I was just going to comment that when you actually put studded tires on children's bikes, that's where, from a pocketbook perspective, would really make a difference for families. I've had to do it for both of my kids, and it's about $200 to put on a crapper bike, so.
Yeah, good point. Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I just had a question about, there's sort of almost an afterthought in the report about we're going to replace the LEED building standards. And I should have highlighted it because I can't find it now. But I just wanted to ask more about that. And also, what kind of incentives or information do we give developers who are planning the development to sort of say, here's what you can access federally, here's what the town's doing, because there's so many different avenues, and what can we do to encourage them to do that. And just to make an observation that was interesting to me was that waste is only 6% of total GHG emissions, and given the amount of attention that it gets, it's kind of interesting to note that if GHG is our most pressing concern in terms of climate change, then single-use plastics are not such, there's other reasons that they're not the best things. But anyway, it was interesting to me. And thank you for all your work on this.
Thanks. Yeah, to your last point, it is interesting. It's always been kind of the bane of my existence is that nobody pays attention to like building energy and furnaces, and those are really the kind of single most important things that say you can do in a household, and the things that get attention versus the things that kind of would be the most impactful are also often very different. And then just with the LEED policy, it's my understanding that we previously had a kind of a build to LEED silver, I believe, policy, and now we don't have anything guiding our own buildings. And so Stephen is particularly interested in having some guidelines and making sure that we're doing things to show leadership as well.
Yeah.
When we're doing our own buildings, what's guiding that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of council at this time? Seeing none, thanks very much for your report.
Thank you.
This time then, I will move that council accept the update to the Climate Action Plan priority actions for 2020 as presented for planning purposes, and direct administration to bring a proposed budget back for council consideration. Is there discussion on the motion? I'll certainly be supporting the motion. I'm quite impressed by the work that Ms. Fournier has been doing since we brought her on, and really helping to move our initiatives forward. I think the town of Canmore is a textbook example of small communities that are doing a lot in regards to addressing climate change. Our climate action plan is a pretty good example of what a small community can put forward, and through the work that Ms. Fournier is doing now, and with this report, we can start to sink our teeth a little bit deeper into the work and move it forward. So I will happily support the motion. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. And just before we move on to the next item, I did want to give council a bit of a heads up that speaking of climate action, I'm thinking of bringing a motion to the next council meeting. I'll work with the Agenda Review Committee to do that, but in regards to what's happening internationally around governments, municipal governments particularly, signing on the declaration declaring a climate change emergency, I'll be bringing forward a motion to have the town of Canmore, our council, sign on to that declaration. And I don't see that as a token gesture of any kind. I see that as, firstly, acknowledging that when it comes to climate change, I believe there is an emergency, but I also believe that the action that's taking place at the lowest levels of government, municipal governments, is where the real impact is coming. And certainly the town of Canmore has a long and pretty solid record of recognizing and addressing these issues going back, well, for at least a decade. We approved our first environmental sustainability action plan in 2010, I think it was. Revised it again in 2013. We've done a number of things through this past decade, getting to us to this point right now with the new climate action plan. But I'm thinking of some of the actual work on the ground we've been doing. Things like joining with our municipal partners in the Bow Valley to create the Bow Valley Regional Transit Commission, and to institute and start running the buses throughout the communities and through the valley. A big part of the rationale behind that was reducing the greenhouse gas emissions in our valley. Beyond curbside recycling program, not directly tied, well, as directly tied to GHG reduction, but it still works towards that goal. And more recently, with the work we've been doing through the integrated transportation plan and our solar panel installations in our buildings, I mean, the town of Canmore, for a community our size, really has grabbed a hold of these issues. And more I find myself thinking about these things as a grandparent, now that I'm a grandparent, and I wonder what the world's going to be like for my grandchildren who are just 2-3 years old now. When they're as old as my kids, they're in their 30s. So what's it going to look like for my grandchildren when they're 30-something and starting their family? And it's a frightening thing to dwell upon. Regardless, that's a long-winded way, which is unusual for me, I know, long-winded way of giving council the heads up. This isn't actually a notice of motion, it's just a heads up that I'll be working with the Agenda Review Committee to bring a motion to that effect to the next business meeting of council. And with that, we'll move on to Item H2, Snow and Ice Control Agreement Extension. Mr. Heel.
I'll just let your eyes adjust as I move to Simon's left. Good morning, Mayor and Council. It is September, so we need to talk about snow, and I'm here to talk to you about the contract extension that we have negotiated in principle with Volker Steven. So the recommendation is that Council approve a contract extension for 1 year with Volker Steven for snow and ice control services on town of Canmore roadways. Initially, there was an agreement done with Volker Steven in 2005, and it was a sole-sourced agreement. There have been multiple short-term extensions since that initial agreement was signed, and the most recent expiry was on July 31st of 2019. So there are some challenges with the coming season, which hopefully isn't October 2nd, which was like a day after I started last year. As you know, we have a new snow and ice control policy, and there's a service expectation that goes along with that. We desire a multi-year contract, and we need to go to public tender for that contract. A new snow and ice control policy is required, and we need to go to RFP, like I said. The SNCC policy development and approval took time this year. As you know, the policy was approved on July 2nd, and since that time, we had a limited time window for a fair and public process to occur for a multi-year contract to start in the fall of 2019. We believe Volker Steven's a good fit, and we have a good working relationship. They know the town, and it makes sense to use them for a 1-year extension. The extension service coverage would start on the 1st of November, 2019, and it would end on March 31st, 2020, so 5 months of coverage for standby services. The extension ends July 31st, so there's a kind of a handshake agreement in place that they take care of us in the months outside of the 5 that we pay them for their standby equipment. The extension does involve the same terms and conditions as the original agreement. We made some amendments. There's been a price adjustment due to inflation and supply costs to Volker Steven, and it addresses the new SNCC policy. So these are the amendments we've made inside the extension. Alternatives would be to take this service in-house, which is not feasible at this time, budget, and we don't have budget or staff or the ability to execute that for the coming season. And outsourcing to another service provider for 1 year is not a realistic solution, given we're going to public tender. Volker knows the area. We've got the good working relationship with them, and we think it makes sense to, and they are motivated to extend with us. The financial impacts within the extension would be a 2.76% annual inflation increase, and this is set by Alberta Transportation. We will have an increase in salt and brine prices to reflect a portion of the increases in supply cost to Volker Steven. So they're not passing that full increase on to us, they're passing a portion of that on to us. 2019 and 2020 operations budget supports the extension terms. However, there is seasonal variability that can be unpredictable with snow events and snow seasons, which is difficult to comment on. So again, the recommendation is that Council approve a contract extension for 1 year with Volker Steven for snow and ice control services on town of Canmore roadways.
Thanks very much, Mr. Heel. So 1 or 2 questions. Given that the Volker Steven and the province have signed their, you said 10-year contract.
They've done a 10-year agreement,
Yeah.
yes.
And typically we've tried to synchronize with that in our contract. So when we get to this 1 year, if council should support this, with whatever contractor we then sign a long-term contract, would we try to set it up so the end point of that contract coincides with the end point of the provincial contract with Volker Steven, or do you see that as being irrelevant?
That would be an ideal scenario for us to do, so we would probably go about extending or RFPing for terms that would be similar to what the Alberta Provincial Highways contract.
So then it could be a 9-year contract signed with the new contractor.
Correct.
Great, thanks. And currently Volker Steven has a lease on the facility in Elk Run, is that correct?
Correct.
And that's a number of years remaining on the lease?
That would be,
Yeah, we actually just renewed the lease with Volker Steffen, so it's a 10-year term, so it mirrors the contract that I have with the province. So it started this year, 10 years out, it will expire.
So, Mr. Hill, is that relevant at all to the consideration of bids for contracts from other providers? I mean, having that facility in Canmore is clearly a big plus for Volker Steffen, but is it something that other contractors can work around?
I mean, I think they can. There are other providers with equipment that can do this service within Canmore or within a reasonable distance of Canmore. I mean, Volker Steffen would be well positioned with the provincial contract in hand from a location standpoint, but I don't think it's limiting to other groups.
Okay. I mean, I would assume there's advantage to being able to store all of the material in Canmore that ultimately gets spread on our roads. And if that, wherever that material is stored was 30 miles away or something, then you run into the issue of getting more sand or whatever every time you're sanding the streets. So it strikes me as a factor.
We will set a sort of a radius that we want a contractor to be able to operate within. So, I mean, something reasonable that would allow for service delivery based on the snow and ice control contract. If they can deliver on that and
Sure.
store within a certain radius, we're happy to entertain
Perfect.
those.
Great, thanks. Mr. Fark, did you have something?
Yes, I would like to weigh on this one, please, in support of Mr. Heal's comments. So the two issues are completely separate. The decision to lease the site to Volker Steffen is based on the provincial highway contract, and the requirements for the provincial highway contract are such that they require a very large site. Canmore's particular municipal needs are actually considerably smaller, and in fact, we negotiate within the lease with Volker Steffen a small reduction in their rent to essentially address the percentage of the site that is required for town operational needs. So we have to understand that they are completely different issues. Mr. Heel is correct. There are a number of other sites, both within the town and elsewhere, where a other operator would be able to store material required. And so we should keep them as separate issues and not view one as impacting the other.
Great, that's helpful, thank you. Are there other questions from council for Mr. Heel? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Mayor Borman. I always push the button when you're not looking, you know that, right?
Well, you think after all these years, you would have learned.
I know, there's one last pass. So thank you for your presentation. You had mentioned that there is a stopgap measure for a large snow event prior to November 1st, if need be.
Right. So currently, I mean, it's a handshake understanding that we receive services from Volker Steffen. So when they provide their pricing to us, they give us a standby charge for equipment to be available between November 1st and March 31st. And historically, there has been an understanding, and they will continue to do that. And they've acknowledged that if we have an event on October 2nd or September 15th or June, we can have snow. They have provided pricing for their equipment to support our needs.
Okay,
with
so we
respect
do
to
have
policy.
an agreement, not necessarily captured in this contract, but
There are
they
no
will come
specifics
out?
outlined within it, but they've been operating in the same fashion for the last 10 years, and that's the same understanding we'll be using.
I think this is a question that's come up before, is if we have a contract and there's something outside of that contract, are we still covered by their services, as opposed to a standby fee? So you're saying that there's a standby fee starting November 1st?
Right, to cover the months of the snow season, and then outside of those months, we have an understanding based on pricing and our needs within the policy that they will support that.
Sorry, maybe if I can just add one thing. The standby fee is really just to cover the cost for them to have the equipment. I mean, it's a cost to them to buy that equipment and maintain it. So they, at this point, contractually, they recoup those costs within that 5 months. But as Mr. Heel pointed out, the contract expires July 31st, so even though we're outside of the time where they recoup the cost for the vehicles, they still will provide the service.
Okay. And my other question is, if you're putting out an RFP, it's kind of irrelevant what what Alberta Parks or Alberta Highways' transportation has negotiated with Volker Steffen.
Right, they
because-
are separate. I mean,
Yeah.
historically, we have operated within the same time frame, but they are separate
Yeah.
agreements.
So we're looking for the best price, right? So
Right.
the RFP is going to reflect that.
Right.
And the time frame is going to be the one that works to get that best price.
Correct.
Right, okay, thanks.
If there's no further questions, thanks very much, Mr. Heel. I'll then move the council approve a contract extension for 1 year of the snow and ice control agreement with Volker Steffen Contracting Limited until July 31st, 2020. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to item H3, the Lions Park Tennis Court expansion with a revised scope and budget. Mr. Canmore. Welcome back from Europe, by the way.
Thank you. Feels, doesn't feel like 10 o'clock in the morning. No. Sorry, I had one presentation, and then looks like there was some changes made to it. There we go. All right. So good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm here to discuss the Lions Park Tennis Court expansion, the construction phase of the project, to request a revised scope and a revised budget to it. So there's the recommendation that it gets revised. That's the project number there. And essentially, we're looking to change the scope from 5 courts, which was originally proposed in the 2019 capital approval, from 5 to 4 courts, and to revise the budget from $800,000 to $630,000. And there you can see the funding split there, which I'll go into more detail in the presentation. So the project was approved. Administration was working with the Canmore Tennis Association to finalize the design, and one of the conditions around the project that it was to receive CFEP funding in the neighborhood of $362,000, which is what was requested. However, the project was not approved for that. Part of the reasons for that there was a lot of requests for the CFEP funding, and the other one was that the project is a seasonal project versus a facility that's all year round, which when CFEP was looking at the different projects, they were given a larger consideration for the longer year-round projects. So administration sat down with the Tennis Association Executive Board, re-looked at the project and say, you know, how can we keep this thing going, because there was a lot of momentum within the Tennis Association and the community around expanding the courts. So one of the options was to look at reducing the scope down to 4 courts. Within the package, you can see what the new orientation would look like. As a diagram, I also have it here as well. And to try to reduce, and that, to reduce the scope, the orientation, we came up with a revised cost of $630,000 to complete the project, different from the $800,000. So we're looking for a reduced scope, or reduced budget. And CFEP does have another grant amount that's up to $125,000 that the Tennis Association is looking to apply. And that's why administration is here this morning, because there is a mid-September deadline for that. And so if council approves that today, then they can go ahead and make the application and hopefully be successful. And because there was a change in the project costs, we also took a look at the repayment plan, and we'll go into those details. So there you can see the tennis courts as being proposed. And the one great benefit about this is not only do we have, we gain 1 more court, but we also now have 4 courts that meet the regulations that they can have them run during a tournament simultaneously at the same time. Right now, the current courts are too close together, so the best they could do is use 2 courts at the same time of the current 3. So there's the project funding sources, and so really the big one is reducing the CFEP grant from 362 to 125, and the Tennis Association is still looking to receive community funding in the neighborhood of $25,000. So really the change is the gap is produced by the cash in lieu of the municipal reserve around $67,000 to make that delta up. And then the repayment plan, if we look at the $800,000, the idea was that the town would be compensated for the full contribution over the course of the project. But with the revisions, the only way that we could make it work with the membership repayments each year over the same term of 20 years was $362,000 to pay back. And then, so right now at this point, instead of the town paying 0% over the 20 years, they're going to have contributed up to close to 20% of the value of the project. We had quite a bit of discussion with the executive board, and that at this point the association under the old scenario was paying for the full cost. And there's a number of people from the community who actually use the tennis courts who are not part of the tennis association. So they felt that it would be helpful and obviously to allow this project to go forward for the town to pay some of the costs as well, because it is a community asset beyond for the association. And so
can I just interrupt there? I'm
Sure.
curious about that. So the earlier project, I didn't recall all of the conversation, but the repayment proposal from CTA was based on all of the funds that they would direct back to the town coming from their own members.
yes, that's,
Right,
the
okay.
repayment is going to be supplied by their membership.
And so now the suggestion is that their members will repay a large chunk of the expense, but also tennis players that use the courts that aren't members of CTA will also, through the town, be paying.
No, sorry. To clarify, so you can see here what the Tennis Association is willing to pay back as part of their membership. The people who pay that are not part of the membership are using it right now, and so they will conceivably continue to use the facility and not pay as they're doing right now. And so that's why there's this almost 20% that they were hoping that council will be willing to pay for, because there is, beyond the association, considerable community benefit of people who are using it that are not members.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Really? My apologies.
Well, that's what I was asking. I was trying to get to the kernel of the nut there.
Yeah.
That there's people that play tennis, don't pay the tennis club, so there's no flow through.
Yes, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
We're all good with that. Sorry, go on with your presentation.
No, that's it, Mayor Borman. That's the end of the presentation, so there's the recommendation for council's consideration.
Excellent, thank you. Are there questions from members of council? Councillor Comfort.
So is there a plan B if the $125,000 grant from CFEP doesn't come through?
We don't have a plan C in our back pocket at this point. We'll have to go back with the board and I mean, ultimately we want the project to go ahead that will increase the number of courts. And as we showed in the diagram, one of the other scenarios we did look at was taking the existing 3 and making, allowing more distance between them so we could run 3 instead of 2. And there is some benefit to that. We'd have to cost that a little bit more. So we have our fingers crossed that option B will get approval for the $125,000 and we can begin the project next year.
Councillor McCallum.
There's more than one application date for the CFEP for 125 under, though. Like, there's up to 3 application dates per year. So the Tennis Association could essentially continue to apply until the man says yes.
Yes, absolutely. But the idea was to, it takes, like last time, we didn't
Of
find out
course,
until the spring.
ideally, it would be great for the funds to come in now so that we could start working on the project, but if we had to,
Yeah.
it could be pushed back, could it not?
If-
If we
if-
were able to get the funding stream from a different, the grant streaming from like, there's up to 3 application points. You can continue
Yeah.
to apply until you get hopefully you get what you are looking for.
There are some timing sensitivities around this project. They're aware of their membership and the public use of the facilities, and they wanted to have as less disruptions as possible. So by trying to secure all of the funds earlier, they can hit the ground running next year and minimize disruptions for players. And so by waiting until the next one, it would be very difficult to meet, to have a schedule that would accommodate the users. So they can continue to apply.
Right.
So this project could live on.
So ideally, we
and
would love the funding to come in from the September 16th application date, but
Yep.
if necessary, the tennis club could continue to apply for the next application date, which is only 4 months down the road, I believe.
Yep.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just was curious. if
We
I was
just may
looking
not
at
be
a
able to deliver the project in 2020, so
Right.
then we would have to be back in front of council
Yep.
again.
Yeah, that's a hassle, I get it. Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Stanford?
Thank you, Mayor Barman. In your diagram of the outline of the courts, there's green spaces around there, and I can't quite read them on my, I can't quite read the labels on them. Do you have?
Yeah, no.
No.
I'd have to stand on that table there, and I'm not
So
even
it's
sure.
no
if
better
that
on
would
your
help.
copy than my copy.
Yeah.
So what do you foresee for the green spaces around the tennis courts?
Well, this here is where the existing playground is right now, where I'm showing with the cursor. So it will move into that space here. This here is the treat area. I think what had happened is this is a property line right here. So the designer had just, nothing's really intended to happen in this space here. This is to be left as well, and this would just be left and landscaped for perhaps a gazebo or something in the future that the tennis club would look at as a phase 2 expansion.
And so the current playgrounds would be moved to another location?
Yeah, there's a 2019 project that was also approved to relocate the playground into this, this location up here, right there. And so if this project gets its funding, the idea is to implement both projects next year at the same time.
Okay, great, thank you.
And with this design, is there an opportunity for further expansion? The previous project, which had 5 courts, I thought was compelling, the need for more courts. And will we be able to design additional courts in that area in the future?
Yeah, the space that would be earmarked for that would be where the ball diamonds are right now. So the other benefit of going from 5 to 4 is that the ball diamonds can stay, which was actually a huge cost to pull all that material out of there in the fencing. So that can stay until there is an expansion. The other benefit is that the Veterans Tennis the Veterans Park Tennis Court located right here at the end of Main Street is also compliant with the spatial requirements. And so right now, if they were to operate a tournament, they would have 5 courts available to them.
Great. Are there any other questions from members of council at this time? Seeing none, thanks very much, Mr. Canmore. Then I'll move that council approve a revised scope for the Lions Park Tennis Court Expansion Construction Project number 7096 from 5 courts to 4 courts, and a new budget of $630,000 funded with $413,000 from the MSI, $67,000 from cash in lieu of municipal reserve, and $150,000 of other funding comprised of $25,000 from the Canmore Tennis Association and $125,000 in provincial grant, CFEP grant. Discussion on that motion. I will support the motion. Disappointed that the original vision isn't being developed at this time, but still this is a good opportunity to improve the tennis facilities available for our community, and I think the use of the cash in lieu of municipal reserve is a good use of those funds. That's in many ways what it's intended to do, provide recreational opportunities for the community. So happy to support the motion. Councillor Seeley.
I'm also prepared to support this revised proposal. Tennis as an outdoor amenity is a high priority in the Recreation Master Plan, so it fits there. And I also like the enterprise cost recovery model, fee for use. It's a refreshing approach as it was originally supported. And this project is also contingent on the CFEP grant. You know, we can make adjustments if needed, but I look forward to that. And I like when community groups take an active or proactive approach to enable and inform these projects.
Right you are. No further discussion. I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Move on to item H4, home food waste bins. Mr. Robbins.
Mayor and Council, I'm here today to speak on the Organic Waste Diversion Program. Two pieces of business. The first one is a request for a decision. So this is the request. In the scope of the Organic Diversion Program, we had put purchasing 2,000 home waste containers, and we're just asking that number to be increased to 4,000. And the reason behind that is basically Canmore is amazing. So we've already handed out 2,000 bins in the first 2 weeks of announcing the program. So it's a voluntary pilot program, and already about 1/3 of households are keen to participate. The funding for this, the first run of containers cost around $10,000. We're looking to make a transfer from another project. So we had a skid steer replacement has a $12,000 surplus. So we're just taking $10,000 from that project and moving it over. We want to be able to support the interest by providing more bins for the community. So that's the request. Any questions or discussions?
Thank you for that brief presentation. And I agree, sitting in my office for the last couple of weeks has been remarkable. Just a steady stream of people coming into the office to get their bin. And everybody's pretty pumped on it. So thanks for the work you've done to get us to this point. I have a question just in a matter of process. So it notes in the report that the CAO has the authority under the budget amendments policy to authorize this budget transfer. In which case, why is council being asked to approve it? Ms. DeSoto.
It's the scope.
It's a change of scope. It's only, I have the ability to authorize the budget transfer, but not the scope change.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? See none, thank you very much. Mr. Robbins, thank you for the report. I'll move the council approve a change of scope for project Organics Diversion Program 7102 to increase the number of home food waste bins purchased from 2,000 to 4,000. And I'll speak in support of that motion to the same effect that I just spoke. I think it's wildly fabulous that the community is responding so quickly and strongly to this program. I think that's amazing and excellent. So buy a couple thousand more and keep a couple thousand more homes happy. Any other discussion on the motion? See none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And with that, I'll move council be adjourned. Those in favor? What? Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, well, of course.
You're not done with me yet.
We could have had that after, but anyways, go ahead.
So the next piece of business is that we are launching the residential food waste program today. In a moment, we'll step outside and do a little unveiling of the bins. But I just want to take a few moments here to let you know what went into the launch of this program and what's made it a success so far. So it all began 2 weeks ago with this little Facebook post.
Hey, starting in September, food is no longer garbage. Don't trash your wing bones or take out leftovers. Food scraps go in the food waste bin. The town of Canmore is giving out home food waste kits now. Find out where to get yours at canmore.ca/food-waste.
Much better with sound. Yeah. But Vancouver, the Metro Vancouver graciously let us use their adorable little characters. And with these characters, the communications team has put together a great campaign in many different facets. So obviously we've posted a bunch of stuff on Facebook. We've taken these characters and we've used the Elevation Place video screens there to make announcements. We put print ads in the papers to get the message out. And we've also had radio ads, which this won't work as well because there's no sound.
Hey, food scraps aren't garbage. You can now recycle all your food waste in Canmore.
And all
food
these
waste
pieces,
like bones, leftovers, and coffee filters belong in your food waste bin.
Culminated in the huge success of our outreach programs. So the sustainability team, along with 15 volunteers, hosted 9 events already. And so we were handing out the lovely bins, which we'll grab for you.
This one back into the pile because I only have my. Thanks, Simon. Is there anything in? Oh, this is heavy.
So we have held 9 of these events. We've gone to the grocery stores, so Safeway, Save-Ons, Nutters, and then also Elevation Place in the Mountain Market. And the hope for these outreach programs was to catch people as they were running their errands. And we ended up having people lining up specifically for these events. So they were lining up out the doors, which was fantastic. And the front desk at the Civic Center and Public Works have also been excellent ambassadors in handing out bins and educating residents. Another thing we hoped to create some buzz with was the containers themselves. So we put out a public art call, and the arts and events supported us a lot in this process, which was great. So the lead up to this day has been a great exercise in the townwide collaboration. Everyone's been really helpful, and lots of work has gone into it. And these communication efforts are going to be ongoing. There's going to be a need to keep people educated and doing this program properly. So you'll see more material come out in the future. And with that, I guess let's head outside and unveil and launch the program.
In one tiny moment.
In one tiny moment.
Because I still have to adjourn council.
Right, after we adjourn council.
Which is, well, I was so excited about going outside for the next part that I entirely skipped this part. But thanks very much for that report. And with that, I'll move council be adjourned. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried. Council's adjourned. And we'll step outside.
Oh, we need the heavy one.